Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe, addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
Welcome to today's program. For your viewers who have not been with us in some of the past years, it is a tradition on this program that every fall we bring some very special people to our studio from our campus to talk about the books that they read during the summer. And we do 1 week on fiction and 1 week on nonfiction, and it's wonderful ideas that you might want to pursue. I welcome to the program two of my colleagues, very, very dear friends. First of all is Dr. Virginia Tinsley Johnson. She chairs the Division of Communications, Fine Arts, and Humanities at North Idaho College. And I should add also she's vice chair of the Idaho Humanities Council. She holds a baccalaureate degree from the College of Idaho in English. She has a master's in the same field from the University of Idaho, and she received her Doctor of Arts in English from Idaho State University. And I want to say about my good friend, Dr. Johnson, that she is a true intellect, and that's one reason why it was such a great treat to do this. You read constantly, and you've contributed in so many ways to this institution in our state, and once again, it's great having you here.
Thank you, Tony. My pleasure.
And equally warm to welcome Denise Clark, who is a North Idaho College librarian, and she holds a baccalaureate degree from Michigan State University in Theater Arts and English, and her master's degree is from Western Michigan University in Library Science, and another true intellect. In fact, I want to say about my friend Denise that for 16 years, if I've gone to the library to ask her about a book, she has always known the book, with one exception in 16 years. So a true intellect and a wonderful friend. Welcome to.
Thank you, Tony.
Today we want to deal with fiction in the books you've been reading this summer. And I welcome, as always, our regular panelist, Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and she will start today's questioning.
Welcome to the program. It's fun to be here and talk about books. I was going to ask you as a first question, what was the favorite book that you read this year? But perhaps that's not a good question to ask. What is one of your favorite books? Because with book connoisseurs, as both of you are, it's very difficult, I suppose, to pick just one favorite. So, for those of us who are in music, you can't pick one favorite song. So, let's start with you, Denise. Do you have a book that you really enjoyed reading this year? And tell us why.
I do. In fact, I have it in this pile right here, and it's called The View from Castle Rock by Alice Munro. And I have to tell you a little story about Alice Munro. I have a friend who loves Alice Munro, and if she's watching today, she'll know who she is. She has been telling me for the past, I don't know how many years, Denise, you must read Alice Munro. Oh, I don't know, their relationship story. She talks about adolescence and family. That's usually not the subject matter I'm really interested in reading. She says, oh, Denise, I just don't understand this. You must read. So I finally picked up this book, The View from Castle Rock. She has been right for years. This is probably one of the best gifts my friend has given me, is introducing me and bothering me and getting me to read Alice Munro. This book is an interesting amalgam of fiction and nonfiction. And I think that's one of the things that intrigued me most about it. Alice Munro started doing and going back through some family archives. And her one side of her family came from the Edinburgh region of Scotland, the Laidlaws. And they were prolific documenters of their lives and their interests. And so she compiled a lot of that information and did some research, and then wrote a series of short works that weave together as fictionalized, maybe family history. She even says it's not nonfiction and it's not fiction. There's more truth of my life in this work than there is in anything else I've ever written. And she's a consummate writer. And so she talks about her father raising foxes in Ontario and the business failing, and growing up as acting as a serving girl in a very wealthy home that was on Lake Huron in Ontario, and her first love affair. And it's just this delightful work and memoirs. And one of I think the ending of the book was just so touching. And I'd like to read just a little bit about, just a little bit of the ending. It says, now all these names, all these family names I've been recording are joined to the living people in my mind, into the lost kitchens, the polished nickel trim on the commodious presiding black stoves, the sour wooden drain boards that never quite dried, the yellow light of the coal oil lamps, the cream cans on the porch, the apples in the cellar, the stovepipes going up through the holes in the ceilings, the stable warmed in winter by the bodies and breath of the cows, those cows whom we spoke to in words common in the days of Troy, so boss, oh boss. The cold wax parlor where the coffin was put when people died. And in one of these houses, and I can't remember whose, a magic doorstop, a big mother-of-pearl seashell that I recognized as a messenger from near and far, because I could hold it to my ear when nobody was there to stop me and discover the tremendous pounding of my own blood and of the sea.
Thank you. Jenny, how about you?
Well, I have one in my pile too. And this is sort of an unusual one for me to pick because I usually don't really go into short stories so much. This is a collection of short stories called The Shell Collector by a young man who is now Idaho Writer-in-Residence named Anthony Tony Doerr.
And he's going to be on this
And
program
he's,
later.
yes, he is. He's coming to town for our Art from the Heart Festival that'll be here a little bit later this month. But The Shell Collector got me started with Tony Doerr, and now I have read all three of his books, and I brought along another of his, another favorite, and he's in my nonfiction collection as well because he's done all of these things. He is a remarkable young man. I don't think he's 35 years old yet, and he's already won 3 O. Henry Prizes for his short fiction. And I was, again, sent his way by someone else who said, well, do you know about Tony Doerr? And I said, no. And I picked this up, and I started reading, and I wish these stories wouldn't have ended. It's that kind of story that you just want to slow down because you know you're on the last page, and you don't want it quite to end. Fabulous collection where he weaves some of his favorite themes. He talks a lot about dreams and their role in life. He has a lot of the natural world. In fact, he is a science reviewer for the Boston Globe. He lives in Boise, but of course in the land of email and so forth, that's not a problem. But like Denise, I think I'm drawn to the language that he uses. Just to let you know of his range, by the way, too, in settings. The first story, The Shell Collector, takes place in Kenya, and it's about a blind man who is a conchologist, who is an expert on shells, and who knows them by their touch. And he discovers a shell that has some curative powers, and of course his private world blows apart when everyone finds that out. The second story is set in Montana, and that hero is a big game hunter guide, and that's called The Hunter's Wife. And he has another story about a young woman whose sister falls in love with a guy from the circus who happens to eat metal. So he devours plates and silverware and larger pieces of metal. So that's an interesting one. And then there's one about a dead whale on a beach and finding the heart and so on. It's just remarkable range. But I thought I'd read just a little bit from The Hunter's Wife. This hunter falls for a young woman who's also not with a circus, but she's a magician's assistant, and she is very attractive and very young. And so he keeps following her around and going where this magician is, and finally he lures her away with feeding her rhubarb pie. Yes, I thought you might. And then he lures her into his cabin, and here's the passage that shows his descriptive powers as well as this intriguing stuff going on. Winter threw itself at the cabin. He took her out every day. He showed her 1,000 ladybugs hibernating in an orange ball hung in a riverbank hollow, a pair of dormant frogs buried in frozen mud, their blood crystallized until spring. He pried a globe of honeybees from its hive, slow buzzing, stunned from the sudden exposure, each bee shimmying for warmth. When he placed the globe in her hands, she fainted. Her eyes rolled back. Lying there, she saw all their dreams at once, the winter reveries of scores of worker bees, each one fiercely vivid, bright trails through thorns to a clutch of wild roses, honey tidally brimming 100 combs. so she can read the dreams of these animals. He takes her out to where a grizzly bear is hibernating, and she digs out the snow, and he's whispering, and she says, "I want to touch it." And so she does. She touches a sleeping grizzly and says, "Would you like to know what he's dreaming about?" And so then she builds on this ability to read dreams and sort of foresee what, she's a psychic. But anyway.
It's unbelievable, these wonderful authors, the use of the language and how powerful it is.
Absolutely.
What I'm going to do, because we're almost half through the program already, it goes so fast. You brought up several books, and today's program is on the fiction that you've been reading. Virginia, I will start with you. And one you just mentioned we can lay aside, but just at this point, just identify and briefly tell us about the others, and then hope we get back to read a passage or two.
I'll hold up this other book by Anthony Doerr. This is the second book I read, which is a novel called About Grace. And it's an interesting pun because the main character in this one is a man who loves the weather. I mean, he's a weatherman, but he also studies nature, and his daughter is named Grace. So it's about their relationship and so on. And it's also about the other kind of grace that you receive.
So both kinds.
So both kinds. Then this one, and I think it's so interesting that Denise and I have books that have kind of the same thing going. A story called Year of Wonders, which is based on an actual happening during the plague in Europe, that a village set itself apart so that it would no longer spread the plague. That the minister in that town decided, here's the way we're going to sacrifice, and he gave up his servants, by the way, and they went away. One family didn't quite obey, but the main character is a young woman in this account, and it's based, as I said, in reality, but the author, Geraldine Brooks, then made an entire story out of the people in this town, in particular this young woman. So that was really interesting. Then, as it turned out, just by happenstance, another book that was based on actual happening, A Widow of the South, which I purchased, and then I think you're going to see that I'm into this war stuff that I don't know where my brain went, but this is about the Civil War, based on an actual person whose home was overtaken by the Confederates as a hospital. And then her connections with some of the soldiers that were there, her own family, her children who had died. And it's interesting in that it has not only her point of view, but also one of the soldiers and one of the slaves and the husband and several other people in this battle, in a major battle in the Civil War. And then I brought my, I suppose one could call less intellectual, if I'm an intellectual, Tony. I am one of those people hooked on Janet Ivanovich. I am, and Stephanie Plum, her wonderful character who's a bounty hunter in New Jersey with an intriguing grandma who loves going to funerals, and they're kind of her entertainment. And Stephanie's got two boyfriends, one of whom is another bounty hunter who's really mysterious and dark and wonderful, and then her ex-high school boyfriend who's a policeman. And this is 12 Sharp, and she's written 13 now, and I haven't read that one yet, but I have read 12 Sharp, and I have a passage here later. We want to hear how Grandma, do you want to hear this now?
We'll wait.
Okay, we'll come back.
Come back.
Grandma at the funeral parlor.
Well, I just have to put a footnote in. When I was a young boy in North Carolina, there was this elderly couple retired, and they went to every funeral in the county. That was their thing to do. And whether they knew the person or not, they just mourned and mourned over the person. And so I could only think of that in relation to that book. It was just the most interesting couple.
Yes.
So Denise, we'll now let you take us through the same way that Virginia did these particular books, and then we're going to have both of you do another reading.
Okay. I think these books are kind of emblematic of my probably outlook on life. Everyone says when you look at a glass, Denise, some people see it half full and you always see it half empty. And that's probably true. If you look at my preferences in reading, it's pretty gritty stuff. The one I'd like to, and this was published in 1990. This has been out for ages. But if people haven't read this, I consider this one of the best fiction works to come out of the war on Vietnam. And Tim O'Brien, one of the best writers. He's a Vietnam vet. It's a collection of short stories, but they all weave together. The characters reappear in the stories, and it's actually the things that they carry. The first piece in the work is my favorite. I mean, he starts out with a bang. But if anyone wants to get a sense of what it was like serving in Vietnam, they couldn't do better than to read this. The things they carried than Tim O'Brien, any of Tim O'Brien's work. but this one in particular. Another, and this is a gritty. I love Cormac McCarthy, but boy, I think you have to have some fortitude to read this man. Life, life is gritty. This one is about a drug deal gone bad, and it's called No Country for Old Men. And we start out with a guy who comes across a vehicle, a drug stash, $2 million in dead bodies. And he kites the $2 million, and then it's a ride from then on. And it's one of those books you can't put down, but it's also doesn't paint the rosiest picture of the world or people, I might add. It's a typical Cormac McCarthy read, but I can't too highly recommend it. I really like. And Pete Dexter, another gritty guy. I think I reviewed one of his called Brotherly Love on this program, and this one's called Train. And all of his works are set in the Philadelphia area. Train is an African-American golfer. But he's a caddy, actually. He caddies, but he's a brilliant golfer, and he's a smart guy. And he teams up with this down-and-out sergeant with the San Diego Police Department called Miller Packard. And Millard is a gambler. And so they team up to fleece these golfers that come to this particular high-end golf course. You know, they bet. And Miller Packard takes Train and the characters in this book on a pretty bumpy ride. And so, and I don't want to, it's a weaving of interrelationships among the characters, Train and Packard, and then Packard's girlfriend, Nora, who's the victim of a horrible hijacking and, has survived it. But they're all three damaged people who come together and manage to damage themselves even further in their relationships with one another. So it's just cheery reading here.
You're reading the summer book here.
Yeah. Now this is cheerier, The Meadow. This has been out for a while too. James Galvin. And it's set in the borderlands of Wyoming and, I was going to say, where is it? Colorado, I think, and Wyoming. Right in that high mountain country where there isn't much land that's really open to do any, farming or cattle ranching on. But here's this little meadow that has been passed down from one generation of owners to the next that has survived. And there are beautiful descriptions of the meadow changing over the seasons, and then the gritty people who have managed to hang on to this hard scrabble, plot of land. And, it essentially, they come into the world with nothing, and boy, they leave it with nothing.
And you thought that was more uplifting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see.
I get up in the morning.
A half glass full lady. Well, that's wonderful. I am going, before I go back to Janelle, I'm going to do one of the things. Virginia, you mentioned the one that you want to read a passage from. I believe it was one of Dora's books. Why don't you pick whichever passage?
Oh, okay.
I just like our viewers to see the language. It's just so powerful.
I just thought I would mention this about the Widow of the South. I think I forgot one of the most important points is that what Carrie McGovick, who is the woman in the book, does is that she disinters a whole lot of bodies that were sort of just thrown out because of they were being a hospital, and she created a cemetery that is still there. And so that was her kind of goal in life.
Fiction, it's based on some.
It is definitely, yes. And it even has pictures in here of her and of the graveyard and of her plantation and so forth. So I didn't want to pass over that point, which might be really interesting to some people. Well, the passage I was going to read is from Janet Ivanovich's 12 Sharp, and this is Grandma at the funeral parlor here. So she's at the funeral parlor, and Scooter, interesting name for one of the undertakers, but Scooter says, "Make sure you get a cookie before you leave. I baked them myself, chocolate chip and oatmeal raisin." We hit the cookie table on the way out. "Look at this," Grandma said, taking 2 cookies. Scooter put them on doilies and everything. Such a nice young man. You can entrust your loved ones to a funeral parlor that takes time off to use doilies.
That is. Oh, that reminds me of a couple again. Okay. Now, Denise, if you'd pick one, please.
Well, actually, I'm going to pick Tim O'Brien, just a section to, give someone a taste of, the flavor of O'Brien's prose. And this is from his main work, The Things They Carried, from which the title is taken. It says, they carried all the emotional baggage of men who might die: grief, terror, love, longing. These were intangibles, but the intangibles had their own mass and specific gravity. They had tangible weight. They carried shameful memories. They carried the common secret of cowardice, barely restrained, the instinct to run or freeze or hide, and in many respects, this was the heaviest burden of all, for it could never be put down. It required perfect balance and perfect posture. They carried their reputations. They carried the soldier's greatest fear, which was the fear of blushing. Men killed and died because they were embarrassed not to. It was that had brought them to the war in the first place. Nothing positive, no dreams of glory or honor, just to avoid the blush of dishonor. They died so as not to die of embarrassment. They crawled into tunnels and walked point and advanced under fire. Each morning, despite the unknowns, they made their legs move. They endured. They kept humping.
Very powerful passage. Janelle Berg.
My first question will be for Denise. You're a librarian. Can you please tell our viewers something about how they can go to libraries and get books and encourage them to do so?
Well, I'd like viewers to know that the NIC library is open to any resident of the 5 northern counties. We'll honor local library cards that have been issued by the Cooperative Information Network. That's libraries, Coeur d'Alene Public, Post Falls, Hayden Lake, and all of those. And then anyone